The chapter we are studying in the Synthesis of Yoga, titled The Moods of the Self, describes how the self meets the world when the consciousness has stepped back from the identification with body, life, mind, turned to immersion in the self, and from the poise of the liberation and freedom in the self, when it turns back to its world, it views and experiences all things on the basis of this underlying unity. Multiplicity and difference are all there, but they are as if colors, aspects of that unity. And when this consciousness embraces its world, it embraces all its poles, all its planes, all its modes of being. And this chapter synthesizes all of these different extremes of creation and of experience in how the self views them. And so it reconciles the various extremes of philosophies and religions. We have already seen in an earlier paragraph the reconciliation of the monist, dualist, qualified monism perspectives. And in the paragraph we studied last, the three Purushas, the divine manifested as supporting and involved in movement in nature, which is also an aspect of the self. All this enormous, humongous movement that is world is power of self in movement. At the same time, there is the station of the self which is completely static, unchanging, always complete, free, still, against which this enormous play can take place. The image traditionally is one of Shiva baring his chest for the play of Kali to dance upon his chest. And because he supports, the movement is possible. But without the movement, this static consciousness would be incomplete, unmanifested. And so these two poises exist not only in the cosmos, in its largest scale, but they exist also in everything in the cosmos, in every process, in every event, in every being, including in us, and on every part of our consciousness, on every plane. And yet there is a more fundamental, essential station in which we know the movement as movement of self, and the static stillness as the silence of self. These two become the two stations of the Purusha. But if we are identified with only one of them, we do not know the other. Our mind, identified with the movement, loses itself in the movement, unable to find its poise of rest and freedom. But if we station ourselves and identify in the silence, we are unable to manifest. And so the objective is to reach the third poise of the Purusha, which is the Gita calls the Supreme Purusha, Uttama Purusha, which includes both poises as aspects of itself. And from such a station of consciousness, we enjoy the freedom and the silence of the static self, as well as are able to engage fully, entirely, with complete involvement in the movement of life. And the emergence into this station of the highest is the goal that is set for us. The next chapter that we take, the next paragraph that we take now, continues this line of discussion, but with two other poises, two other essential modes or fundamental aspects or two poles of the self, which are in the Indian thought described as Guna, the Brahman as quality, Guna, or nirguna, without quality. And Sri Aurobindo explains this, and similar reconciliation takes place, but this has a different flavor, a different aspect to the experience. He writes, connected with this triple mode of the self is that distinction which Indian philosophy has drawn between the qualitied and the qualityless Brahman. And European thought has made between the personal and impersonal God. So he is using capital letters, qualitied and qualityless, personal and impersonal, to indicate that it is not just the superficial quality, but a fundamental poise of the self that we are speaking of, something which is all-inclusive and even transcending our current human experience. So there is the qualitied Brahman and the qualityless Brahman. And he quotes, the Upanishad indicates clearly enough the relative nature of this opposition when it speaks of the Supreme as the qualitied who is without qualities. Nirguno guni, from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. The qualitied who is without qualities. And when you dwell upon this idea, at first it meets the intellect as a contradiction. The qualitied who is without qualities. And if you are able to break free from the normal surface working of the mind, making your mind very quiet and allowing the sense of it to emerge in a quieted mind, then one begins to get a glimpse of something without qualities and yet able to express all qualities. And when you are able to hold this, you don't feel it such a big contradiction. The moment you shift to the domain of words and normal cognitive mind, process of mind, the two as words, as ideas appear to be contradictory. As an experience, when we take it in a more intuitive sense, something itself having no qualities but is able to radiate all qualities, and it does not feel so strange. In fact, it feels right. But he will elaborate on this, and that will be the theme of this whole paragraph. So we read the text a little and then we go deeper into it. We have again two essential modes, two fundamental aspects, two poles of eternal being. Both of them exceeded in the transcendent divine reality. So similar to the previous idea, there is a transcendent reality which exceeds both of these stations. These are two specialized expressions. They correspond practically to the silent and active Brahman. For the whole action of the universe may be regarded from a certain point of view as the expression and shaping out in various ways of the numberless and infinite qualities of the Brahman. I skip one sentence and then he says, many qualities, and then, but by none of these, nor by all of them, nor by their utmost infinite potential is he bound. He is above all his qualities, and on a certain plane of being rests free from them. So this gives us already a framework in which we explore this a little more. There is, first of all, this perception. He says, from a certain point of view, the whole universe may be regarded as the expression and shaping out in various ways of infinite qualities of the Brahman. Certain point of view, because that's one way of looking at it. There are other ways of looking at it which are quite different, but they're all valid. So what would be, for example, another way of looking at it? Each thing is itself Brahman. You do not have qualities going all around, mixing, combining to create an experience. Everything is Brahman here. Brahman as this, Brahman as that, Brahman as that. That is another way of looking at the universe, perhaps more profound. But in our current human experience, as we look at the whole world, and this is what science confirms, we see everywhere things which have in them certain properties. When science begins to dwell deeper, it finds the things themselves are made of smaller things, and so on, until at some point we come to the idea that the smallest things are common to all things. And this was the major breakthrough when science came to atomic elements, and then all the elements are made of proton, electron, neutron in various combinations. So you could take this material, disassemble into its proton, electron, neutron, reassemble in a new pattern of proton, electron, neutron, and you have a completely different material, different element, giving out different qualities. And at that point you are left with a strange question. If they are all coming from the same underlying materials, where do the different qualities come from? Why is it that the rearrangement makes for a different quality altogether? That means quality itself is not intrinsic to the fundamental particles. They are emerging from their arrangements. And how do those arrangements lead to the qualities? And so science gets stuck here. Current physical science gets stuck here. There is a very different way of approaching the same science, and this is closer to the ancient Indian approach, the Vedic science. And I'm going to present the two things briefly so that we can appreciate how they are complementary, but also how one of them is perhaps more deeply relevant to our experience of life. So in the physical science today, you say that if you arrange certain protons, electrons and neutrons in this particular way with these numbers, you have a hard metal, let's say iron. The same protons, electrons, neutrons I could assemble and reassemble in pairs in a way that I have a gas, hydrogen. Or I could take hydrogen, which is nothing but one electron and one proton, separate it or recombine it and make iron out of it, or gold out of it, or any other element. Hydrogen being the most basic, one electron, one neutron, one proton. I could make any metal, any object, any substance out of just rearranged hydrogen gas. But where does that quality emerge from? It was not there in hydrogen. It was not there in the proton. It was not there in the electron. And so we say somehow the arrangement is making the quality. And so you think about it, what does the quality mean? When I approach this object and engage with it in whatever way, by touch, by light, sight is nothing but reflected light, by sound, something has to go to it, enter in relation to it, come back to me in order for me to register its existence, right? When that thing engages with it, the way it gets modified and returns to me is for me the experience of the quality. So when my finger goes right through, I say this is hollow, or it is soft, it is gaseous. When my finger encounters push, resistance, then I say, this is hard. When the resistance is qualified, if I push hard, it resists, it balances the resistance in certain proportions. I say this is elastic. When the light reflects from it without breaking apart and scattering, then I say it is shiny, metallic. When it scatters in many different directions, then I say it is dull, matte, non-metallic. So really what we mean by quality here in this worldview is that how that object responds or modifies our contact with it. Now putting it another way, there's something there with which it influences everything in the universe and modifies the universe. Now if you think about it, you'll quickly realize that this is fundamental, this is essential, this quality which is changing things is something which is self-existent. It's not dependent on proton, electron, neutron. It's there already. Somehow it's related to arrangement. In fact, now we'll go a step deeper and we'll say, how do we know what is an electron or a proton? By its qualities, right? And so the logical conclusion would be, a bundle of qualities, because it modifies our contact with it in a certain way, we call it electron. Another bundle of qualities it modifies in a different way, we call it proton. In other words, the objects, particles of proton, electron, neutron have no reality in themselves. They are only bundles of qualities. You can see how the whole physical science of today is turned on its head. While it began by saying all qualities emerged from rearrangements of some fundamental particles, now we come to the conclusion that there are no particles, there are only bundles of qualities that to us, because we approached it looking for a particle, to us they appear as specific particles to which we give names. And that's why the moment we cross that boundary and enter deeper beyond proton, electron, neutron, suddenly you have a zoo of hundreds of particles. And more they seem to make less and less sense. And yet they're all bound in some kind of mathematical relationships and proportions, and they're all unstable. What if there are no particles? What if there are only underlying qualities? Qualities which cluster, which bundle, and therefore we have stable qualities through arrangements of clusters, or unstable qualities when you go below to smaller so-called subatomic particles. And so in the Vedic perspective, the starting point being different, the starting point being not particulate. Particles are a phenomenon. The underlying reality is oneness of consciousness. And so recall the discussions we've had before of the 5 elemental states of self-modification of consciousness. Consciousness, utter awareness, which is energy of awareness, now enters in relation with itself, modulates itself, as if oscillates in relation to itself, waves combining, and so on. 5 elemental layers of self-modification, 5 operations of force, which we've discussed in other sessions in the Kena Upanishad. And at that point, you realize it is the way consciousness chooses to meet things, which is the bundle of qualities. And according to how it meets things, the thing itself sees a structure, an arrangement, or a form. What is form? The flower exists as this form because of the bundle of qualities which reflects light in a particular scattering that gives to my eye the image of this form. Otherwise there is no form. Form is the way mind registers response to a bundle of qualities. And now when we look at the universe in this way, fundamentally all reality is a play of qualities, of consciousness. But what do we mean by quality of consciousness? The way consciousness energizes itself to push forward, rhythm out, interact with other things which are also consciousness, energies of consciousness. Now you read this text and you see how it makes sense. His being, Brahman. Remember, okay, I'll read the whole sentence. For the whole action of the universe may be regarded from a certain point of view as the expression and shaping out in various ways of the numberless and infinite qualities of the Brahman. So the whole universe is just this numberless and infinite qualities of Brahman shaping out, rhythming out to create as if the appearance of shapes. His being, Brahman, assumes by conscious will all kinds of properties, shapings of the stuff of conscious being, that is stuff of conscious being shaping out by pushing forward qualities. Shapings of the stuff of conscious being, habits as it were of cosmic character. When it continues to rhythm out, shape out in a certain way, we call it habit. Character is nothing but repeated habit of certain way of relating, responding. And power of dynamic self-consciousness. You're aware of yourself and your power to be whatever you choose to be in yourself, and that power is what impacts whatever enters in relation to you. When I choose to be, by my free self-awareness, to be a power of action, everything that impacts me experiences that force of action. When I choose to be in my free self-awareness a power of stillness, everything that impacts me experiences a stillness, non-reaction. When I choose to be in my freedom a power molding, shaping, directing specific action, in awareness of what that needs, it becomes a harmonious movement or engagement. But all of these are nothing but my self-awareness choosing to exercise itself in certain powers of what it is. So, power of dynamic self-consciousness, gunas, qualities, into which all the cosmic action can be resolved. This is a very deep statement, deep insight, that you take all the cosmic action and resolve it to what is behind, what's behind, what's behind. Eventually, you come to this power of dynamic self-consciousness, rhythming out in certain ways. Where it repeats itself, you have a habit. Where it does not repeat itself, you have a free action or non-repetitive expression of qualities, gunas. And all cosmic action can be resolved to this. Now, this is the perspective of the Vedic approach and science, which says eventually everything boils down to this underlying consciousness and its way, its power of self-expression, and that particular power acting out is what we call guna or quality. How many can it put out? Well, it is infinite potential, so infinite variations can be put out. But in all the infinite variations of qualities possible, there are essentially three characteristics. And everything can be resolved to combinations of these three. And I, in fact, briefly described them earlier. When something impacts, you can choose to simply offer a poise, stillness, no reaction. Effectively, it will be experienced as a resistance, but not an active pushback. Or it can actively push back anything which impacts it. So the first would be the tamasic response, inertia, the basis of inertia. The other would be rajasic or kinetic. And a third would be adjusting itself according to what approaches. And so you will have a kind of a harmonious, balanced response. You would call it sattvic. And if you see, whatever the specific quality, eventually resolves itself to a combination of these three. Light hits the flower, rebounds. In the way certain colors of light were absorbed, others were reflected, tamas and rajas. I get a particular color. The particular way what is absorbed, pattern of what is absorbed and what is reflected may vary, creating so many colors. But at the heart of our experience of seeing colors is nothing but tamasic response to certain vibrations of light, rajasic response to others. If the rajasic response is not ordered, it scatters, you have a matte finish. When the rajasic response of reflection is perfectly harmonious, equal, then the reflection itself follows the image of where the light came from, and you have a shiny reflective surface. All variations, all experiences can be resolved in this way, to a mix of these three kinds of response. I touch with my finger, there's a dull resistance, there's a pushback, or there's a harmonious resistance. That's all there is to it. Everything is force meeting force, or rather consciousness as force meeting consciousness as force, and the patterns of force based on a combination of these three possible responses. There are no others. Now this is an extraordinary insight, and it's the basis of a whole philosophical perspective which says that all nature is a combination of these three gunas, three qualities, three guna. And then not only it is true at an atomic or subatomic level everywhere, it's also true in our personality, in our consciousness, in our mind, in our energies. Everything which is part of nature is built of these three. The thing which puts out the three gunas, or the infinite combinations of gunas, itself, does it have some fundamental guna? If it had, that would qualify everything else. It would limit everything. Itself, when it is free of all gunas, it is capable of infinite play of gunas, not being bound by them. So he says, but by none of these, nor by all of them, nor by their utmost infinite potentiality is he bound. Brahman assumes by conscious will all kinds of these gunas and properties, but he himself is not bound by. He gives three different descriptions. None of these, nor by all of them, nor by their utmost infinite potentiality. Why are these three positions? Each of these three takes up a whole line of philosophical speculation also, but also experiential pursuit. Because at the end of the day, anything you can speculate, you can also experience. So there is a view that might say that there may be some gunas that are natural to him. As for example, if we took the station that the self is only silence and non-movement, then we would say simply, well, then it is tamas, inertia, silence, stillness. And everything else, therefore, is not it, or whatever the consequence would be of such a line of thinking. But we could limit him to that, something, some particular aspect. Or he is all goodness, and could limit him to that particular aspect. But he is none of these. Or you could say, well, the totality of all qualities is him. Now you are binding him to the totality of the qualities. The moment he is totality of the qualities, he can never be separately some of these qualities. All of them have to be there at the same time. Some may be highlighted, some may be held back, but they have to be all there at the same time. And you are limiting him to the totality of these qualities. The third poise is, alright, the totality of all these qualities is also finally an infinite number of finite possibilities. What if each of these finite possibilities went to their highest infinite potential and you have an infinity of them? Okay, the mind boggles, but maybe that is Brahman. This is even that it is not. Now, why is this important? Because if it was that, then we could limit Brahman into a definition. In fact, something like this is done in mathematics. I've mentioned this before, but I will repeat this here. There is a concept which comes to the closest of concept of the Brahman, where they speak of infinities. You can have an infinity of numbers, count from one unendingly. Is there something more? Yes, you can conceive of an infinity of numbers and then something after that. And you can do it geometrically, it's not a big problem. And so you have a higher category of infinities. And then you have a still higher complex category of infinities, and higher and higher. You can create an infinite hierarchy of infinities. And it goes on and on and on and on. And then one can conceive of something which is overarching. The set, the total combination, content of all these possible infinities, including their infinite possibilities. That is capital Omega, the absolute. At least that's the highest that the mind can capture of the idea of an absolute. And the mind boggles because there is nothing beyond that. You cannot conceive of something beyond that. Anything you conceive beyond that is already included within this conception. And that would be our approach to Brahman, or our representation of Brahman. But it says even that can be exceeded by that which is Brahman. This at best you can say is Brahman's outlook to the world. And so there's a kind of a peak, a highest station from which everything of the world emerges, including everything in the world and everything beyond the world, but still connected. And so from the world you can get to him who is still the totality of all the content of the world, including infinite possibilities of the world and their highest potential. But there is a station even beyond that, which is indescribable. He is not bound even by this. He is above all his qualities, and on a certain plane of being rests free from them. There is a certain plane where you can say entirely free of all qualities. So you have this term nirguno guni. Guni is qualitied. Nirguno is without quality. So qualitied who is without qualities. Because all these qualities are finally coming from him. So they are his. They are in him somehow. And yet he himself is without qualities. Now, you need to articulate this. You sense something intuitively, but you have to articulate it in terms that the mind can understand, without compromising the truth of it. And Sri Aurobindo does precisely that next. The nirguna, or unqualitied, is not incapable of qualities. See, this is the error our mind makes. The moment we conceive of without qualities, we think of something which is incapable of qualities. So something which is without qualities itself, but capable of infinite qualities. There is a reconciliation, and the mind catches this. Rather, it is this very nirguna, or no quality, who manifests himself as saguna, with quality, or ananta guna, infinite quality. Since he contains all in his absolute capacity of boundlessly varied self-revelation. So these are very precisely stated ideas, and each formulation opens us to some further insights. So let's just review this. First, unqualitied is not incapable of qualities. Rather, it is this very unqualitied, no quality, that manifests as the qualitied. So if there is a station without quality, you do not see anything, perceive anything. If you were to approach such a thing, how would you describe it? So let's consider Going back to our earlier discussion of the three gunas, all qualities being combinations of three. When you approach something, it's a combination of these three gunas. What if the object offered none of the three responses? How would you register it? Light goes to it, it is neither absorbed, nor modified, nor reflected. What is such a thing? It's not even an emptiness, it's not even a black hole. A black hole at least absorbs, right? It does not absorb, it does not reflect. What can you say of it? The only thing you can say is it does not exist. If it exists, it has to absorb or it has to reflect, right? Yes. But in your sensory experience, you'll say it does not exist. Something which neither absorbs, nor reflects, nor modifies in any way, doesn't exist. In order to exist, it must have one of these three modifiers and a combination of these three. And so, our first perception of the Brahman, who is quality less, beyond the three gunas, it does not exist. So what do you call it? Emptiness. That is the Buddhist vocabulary. You see? And so when you speak of emptiness in the Buddhist vocabulary, they will tell you emptiness is not just a hollow, it's not just a void. It is beyond all description of hollow and void. You're coming to the same idea, but from a different approach. By denial, by rejection of form. On the other hand, when you see that, when you know something which is free of all responses, because it is free, it can put out all possible responses without limit, without condition, entirely free. And so it is he who manifests himself as saguna, with qualities, the qualitied, and ananta guna, infinite quality. Why? Since he contains all in his absolute capacity of boundless, varied self-revelation. He contains all. So again we step back. Conceive of something which contains all qualities. Now a ray of light comes to it, or my finger comes to touch it. All qualities. What's going to happen? It's going to be pushed, pulled, absorbed, modified in every possible way at the same time. What would it do? And this is a very rational introspection one can do. So here's a ray coming. It's going to be absorbed and reflected. It's going to be modified to green, to blue, to yellow, to red, to white, to intensity or dimming, every possible modification at the same time. What would happen? All the modifications would cancel each other out. In other words, the ray would go right through and you would say there is nothing there. Interesting. You see, all qualities at the same time is equivalent to no quality at all in our experience. And so the approach to that which is beyond quality has actually two paths. One which says beyond all qualities by negation of qualities, or the other says beyond all qualities by acceptance of all but infinitely all. To the point where to your finite consciousness they all end up cancelling themselves and something which breaks beyond all that. So it is that, he says, this very no quality who manifests himself as qualitied or infinite quality, ananta guna. Since he contains all in his absolute capacity of boundless, varied self-revelation. So he is capable of self-revelation, varied self-revelation, without bounds, all varied self-revelations, and the capacity itself of this without bounds self-revelation is absolute. No qualifying, no limiting, no condition imposed anywhere. And such a thing is held within him, and therefore infinite quality, and yet free of all qualities. And so here the mind tends to flip this way this way, this way, this way, until at some point it silences itself and get a sense of it intuitively. But the moment you try to visualize or conceive, you flip to this side or that side. Now, at this point you realize the way your mind is trying to conceive by an activity is what limits to one side or other. If you become very quiet, something touches and holds, and you get the hang of it intuitively. The very next paragraph, though we are still away from it, the very next paragraph says, if we cannot define the eternal, we can unify ourselves with it. So that's the way to know, even if you can't reduce it to terms. Of course, we have a vocabulary now, we can say these are two aspects of one. That's a mental interpretation, but the experience of it is, it's not two aspects of one, it's one thing. So, he is free from them in the sense of exceeding them. If he were not free from them, they could not be infinite. The moment you put out something from you, which is a part of you by compulsion, there has to be a limit. There has to be something where I cannot do more, because it's a part of me by compulsion. Because I'm utterly free of it, I can put out any amount of it and still not be limited, modified. God would be subject to his qualities, bound by his nature. Prakriti would be supreme, and Purusha its creation and plaything. So the moment this creates that, out of itself, it is bound to that, because that is in it, it is defined, it is bound, limited. Even if it is an infinite piece, it is limited by its defined infinity. And therefore, the movement would predominate, the thing of which it is made, which would predominate. Purusha, the pure consciousness, would be creation and plaything. The eternal is bound neither by quality nor absence of quality, neither by personality nor by impersonality. He is himself, beyond all our positive and all our negative definitions. So the way we approach it, these two ways, would be a negative way of defining the Brahman, positive way of defining the Brahman, but they are our definitions only. That is beyond all as himself. Recall the biblical statement when Moses asks, "Who are you?" "I am that I am." What else can I say of myself? I am what I am, that's it. I am not the quality, I am not the qualityless. I am that I am. So there is a very interesting text called an Upanishadic writing of Sri Aurobindo, written in the style of the Upanishads, in Sanskrit originally. And so the translator into English decided to name it Sri Aurobindo Upanishad. But that's not the term Sri Aurobindo has given. He has not given it a title. But it summarizes his approach to the reality. And in this text, the third paragraph, the third verse, describes exactly this. But just to set the context, I will read out the first two, and that will set the background, the big picture, and then we come to the third verse. First verse, Om. Remember, Om is all the levels of the cosmos, of Brahman, the four levels. The waking consciousness, the objective reality is the U is the dream consciousness, the inner worlds, inner subjective domains. The Ma is the essential, causal, unmanifest, preparing for manifestation, conceiving manifestation. And the silence, as the Ma trails off, is the transcendent, beyond, undescribable. So Ma and the silence are the fourfold Brahman. So whenever the Vedas start with Om, it is to set the context of the fourfold Brahman. And once you're aware of this context, next what is spoken is in relation to this totality. So Om. There is Brahman alone. the one without a second. Being and non-beings, being and non-being are its forms, and it is also beyond being and non-being. There is nothing else except that. All that is contained in the three times, that is past, present, future. And all that is beyond the three times is indeed that one Brahman alone. Whatever is in the universe, small or large, noble or mean, is Brahman alone. Brahman alone. The world is also Brahman. It is true, not false. So straight away, the space, the full spectrum of the experience of time, past, present, future, the experiences of space, the experiences of superiority, inferiority, and our moral concepts, all of these are included as facets, but always they are that. And so the world is not unreal, it is. The next verse. That alone is the transcendent being beyond all three times, beyond all the worlds, penetrating all the worlds, beyond being, beyond non-being, all being, all consciousness, all bliss, without beginning and end, the eternal divine. So here comes the idea, in brief summary, the transcendent which is at the same time immanent, having all these aspects of being, non-being, all being, and yet free of all of them. Now comes the third verse, which is relevant to our immediate discussion. He is without quality and supports all qualities. He has qualities, infinite qualities, and enjoys the state of being without quality. He himself transcends the state of being without qualities and the state of being with qualities. He is neither without quality nor with quality, because he is one and single. The fourth verse, just to get a sense of how it moves. He is beyond the worlds, yet he holds the worlds. He becomes the worlds and enters into them. He transcends time, becomes time. Infinite, he shines as finite. One, he becomes many. Formless, he assumes forms. He achieves all this by his consciousness force, which consists of knowledge and ignorance. Now, so we don't go into all that, but you see here the idea of the moving into manifestation. But after discussing qualities and the relationship with qualities, then only you can speak of manifestation. So let's look at this verse 3. He gives us 4 statements, and they're meant to be meditated upon in sequence. So the first is, he is without quality and supports all qualities. So it's one relationship, he having no quality. And then there are qualities. The relationship is the no quality, which is free of all quality, supports. Like the silent Brahman supports the active Brahman. The Akshara Purusha, non-moving awareness, supports the moving awareness. Very similar to that. He is without quality and supports all qualities. Now comes something else. Next. He has qualities, infinite qualities, and enjoys the state of being without quality. So he has qualities. He is now the qualitied Brahman and infinite qualities. He is enjoying the qualities, but he enjoys the state of being without quality. So having entered into it, he enjoys equally his station outside it, outside the play of qualities. So in the first case, the two were split. There was the quality, and he supported all quality, 3 of them. In the second case, you have the entry of the consciousness moving into the play of qualities, but enjoying equally both poises, in the qualities as well as free from all qualities. But both cases he is enjoying. And now comes the third position. He himself transcends the state of being without qualities and the state of being with qualities. So this is the equivalent of the Uttama Purusha, the third Purusha. He transcends both, enjoying both equally. So you see how very subtly, from the first position to the second to the third, there is a continuity. It is his poise of enjoying both is possible because he is actually enjoying being free of both while being both at the same time. And that is where we have to be in our poise when we re-embrace the world. And in the fourth statement, he is neither without quality nor with quality, because he is one and single. You can be qualitied or not qualitied only in a consciousness that is split. The moment you're in a consciousness which is one, indivisible, undivided, well, you're neither qualitied nor without quality. At the same time, you have quality and you have no quality, because all of these are one, identical. The word single here is a translation of the word kevala eva yaha. Kevala could also be translated the alone. In Savitri you have that line which goes the absolute something and then the alone. Alone because there is no other, there is no two, and the moment there is no two, there is no question of these divisions. So that's the station we have to come to. The fourth sentence is actually pointing us to the poise of consciousness that we have to come to, or from which this is naturally realized. So I think we can move back to the text, and you see how the underlying oneness is really the key. When seated in the oneness, there cannot be this fragmentation or division. And yet we have to have had this discussion, because emerging out of the oneness as we re-embrace, there is the question from here as we look up, how does the self re-embrace its world and its extremes of poles? But also there is the poise as we return to embrace our world, where we could get lost again into the split. And that's why the understanding, yes, this is the poise we have to retain. Not get split into one side or other, but know the oneness. And then this apparent oppositions or extremes or poles are resolved. So the eternal is bound neither by quality nor absence of quality, neither by personality nor by impersonality. He is himself, beyond all our positives and all our negative definitions. And so this, having reconciled this poise, how do we know that? How do we describe that? Because it's bound to neither. So the next paragraph, but if we cannot define the eternal, we can unify ourselves with it. So while words fail, while our current power of cognition as the divided, fragmented mind fails to touch that, there is still a power of cognition above that in consciousness which can identify with that and know that by unification. So unlike the rational mind which knows not by unification but by separation and therefore cannot know that, there is another consciousness which knows by identification, and that can know that because it can identify. We can unify ourselves with it. It has been said that we can become the impersonal but not the personal God. But this is only true in the sense that no one can become individually the Lord of all the universes. We can free ourselves into the existence of the active Brahman as well as that of the silence. We can live in both, go back to our being in both, but each in its proper way, by becoming one with the nirguna in our essence and one with the saguna quality in the liberty of our active being, in our nature. And then he reconciles these two poises. The Supreme pours himself out of an eternal peace, poise and silence into an eternal activity, free and infinite, freely fixing for itself its self-determinations, using infinite quality to shape out of it varied combination of quality. We have to go back to that peace, poise and silence and act out of it with the divine freedom from the bondage of qualities, but still using qualities, even the most opposite, largely and flexibly for the divine work in the world. So I've read several sentences because it completes the full idea. The divine himself takes up a double station. We too can share in that double station in our consciousness. So when we observe ourselves, there is a part within us which leans back to rest in the silence of the self. There's another part within us which leans forward to enter the movement. But they are all both parts or aspects of ourselves in the consciousness of the liberated consciousness. In fact, there is a very important experience in the spiritual journey where we experience our individual consciousness as if lapsing back, like a wave lapsing back into the ocean of stillness, of the self of the world. At the same time, all of our personality, mind, life, body, and everything which is in movement, constructed, is as if like a drop dissolving into the ocean of the universal nature. My individual personal consciousness resting in the self universal, my individual nature dissolving into universal nature. What remains is self and nature universal. The little limited personality formed out of these two is united with this, however briefly, however partially. But such an experience is a transition we all have to pass through at some stage as our individuality opens out to universality. But here we get a glimpse of how we can be in both. So, since the Lord acts out of the center of all things, as the Lord pours himself out from that peace, poise and silence with full freedom, so too within our consciousness we are in both poises, and from that peace, poise and silence within us we pour ourselves into this. Which is we? Both are included in the we, and yet we are free of both. So this is the direction he is pointing us to, and this is the nature of the unification that is involved here. So when we now get to the specifics and details, he says, it has been said that we can become the impersonal but not the personal God. And the idea is this: when we go into the rest, lapse into the silence, we are one with the impersonal. But how do you identify with the one who is the Lord of the whole universe? How can you do that? Because if you were to do that, there would not be you anymore. So, he says, this is only true in the sense that no one can become individually the Lord of all the universes. Because then we would not be anymore individually. But we can free ourselves into the existence of the active Brahman as well as that of the silence. So it's possible to experience ourselves as a focal point through which he pours himself. And freeing ourselves from our limitations, we are as if a special strain or a special line or a special flow of his totality. We can share in his awareness of the whole but we still remain in relation to the Lord as that special movement of His infinite flow, that special movement which is identified as I. So as an analogy, take the sphere of the sun as symbolic of the one divine consciousness, radiating from it every possible ray, infinitely, in every color possible. So every direction there's a ray. How many directions? Infinity of them. Between any two, an infinity of them. Between any two of those, an infinity of them, with an infinity of variations. Each ray is uniquely directed. No two rays will ever collide. No two rays will ever crisscross. And yet between any two there can be an infinite variations. And each one of us as a soul is as a symbol, a unique ray. No two of us are exactly alike. No two of us collide in our intention in the manifestation. Each is unique, and yet all are in perfect alignment, perfect harmony with each other, and all together as if complete the manifestation of the divine. There are groups sometimes, clusters of souls, this facet as distinct from that facet. So we have this term which is actually used in the spiritual traditions, groups. But they're not groups of souls in the sense that they are bound. They are each one unique and free. And yet, because of similarity of alignment, there are affinities. So in the poise he is describing, we live in both stations, equally in the silence, equally in the movement. One with the nirguna in essence. So in the essence of the consciousness, as we lean back to the silence of the self, you are one with that. You do not have any quality expressed. On the other hand, the part of us which is in the active being in our nature, we are one with the saguna, the full qualityed. So we actually experience our nature and our active parts one with all, and holding in them an infinite potential, infinite possibilities. But where is the infinite potential held? Finally resting on the silence of the nirguna. And so it's as if within us this double poise is realized. We have to go back to that peace, poise and silence and act out of it with the divine freedom from the bondage of qualities, but still using the qualities, even the most opposite, largely and flexibly. So this poise allows you then to be free of the qualities, and when free of them you can wield any and all of them, even the opposite qualities. And this is the reason why you will find in the divine action in the world, actually he uses the most opposing forces to somehow work together to create whatever the outcome. This is a very important idea Sri Aurobindo makes. The supramental consciousness, which is this whole, one with this whole, never experiences opposition. Whatever comes to attack it, whatever may challenge it, whatever may oppose it, is already a part of its totality, remember? So if you come to push it, it already is aware of its own consciousness, which represents that push. And so, it simply uses your so-called opposition as a way of fulfilling itself and makes it one of its means. If you approach it by two opposing actions, they are both included already in the supramental totality. And so it simply uses them and aligns everything else in a way that the opposing action is turned into whatever the outcome. And this is the nature of the supramental action. Nothing can oppose it. Even the most aggressive, the most extreme opposition is only a help and accelerates its work. The moment you brought in intensity of force, well, you're speeding up something, and it uses it to speed up what it wants to do. And so this perfect harmony of the supramental consciousness has this inevitability. And when things emerge, it's as if, although facing the greatest opposition, Yet this happened so smoothly, magically, miraculously it seems. And yet you see a chain of sequence of events. So it was not a miracle, and yet the outcome is miraculous. You can see a chain of events because it has arranged things. And this is the beauty of the supramental action here. And that's why the establishment of the supramental consciousness on earth itself is a promise of the inevitability of the evolutionary leap. The question is only the manner of the transition and the nature of the passage. To the extent that there are forces opposing, it takes a certain form. To the extent that there are forces aligning, it takes a different form. But the outcome is inevitable because that is the nature of the supramental action. And similarly, when we are poised in that peace, poise and silence and act with the divine freedom from bondage of qualities, we use all qualities, even the opposites, and we use them largely and flexibly. And this is another very special characteristic. The action is large. When you act to save an ant, that action is not out of context of the larger movement of the action. And so there is one single action that is operating to save the ant, that is operating to modify the stream of the water, that is working upon the wind that is pushing the stream of water, that is in alignment with the sunlight which is pushing the wind. Everything has its cosmic ramifications, even as it has the tiniest, minutest, precise action here. And so the action is always large and inclusive. You do not need to make 2 or 3 separate actions. There is only one single action which includes all the other finer changes. So Mother comments when describing the supramental action, she says, it acts on a large scale. It acts in such a way that there is a sudden change, often a dramatic change, of a character which is as if miraculous, and yet it happens so smoothly and effortlessly that it seems as if inevitable. It would have happened anyway. So when people look at the collapse of the Soviet Union overnight, I think it took 3 days or something. Oh, wow. You see what was 3 days ago and what is now? You say, wow, it is a miracle. It could never have happened. But if you look at the events inside, everything, so to say, supports each other. And you say, well, it would have happened. If not now, after 10 years or after 20 years, it had to happen. And it's like a contradiction. On one level it's miracle, on another level it's inevitable. And it's on a large scale. Suddenly, a large number of people, so many things fell into place. Again, when you look back with the analytic mind, you'll say, oh, there was a pile-up of so many forces, and so it had at some point to coalesce. But if you really study things, you will see there were equally complex forces set up to prevent the coalescing. I remember still reading at that time in the newspapers that in Romania alone, every 3rd person was a government informer. Imagine the whole population. Every 3rd person is a government informer within your own family. There's such an atmosphere of fear to speak out against the government. No one would dare it. And yet when it happens overnight, poof, the whole structure collapses. How did that happen? And you blink, and then your mind quickly adjusts and says, all right, it was inevitable, and you move on. But you cannot explain it. You could not have made it happen even with the best strategies and planning of a human action, which had been attempted for decades. None of it worked. And suddenly it happens. And so there is this large action, free action. It can do exactly what it wants, irrespective of the compulsions of the current forces. And flexible. The same force it can use this way or that way or the other for any outcome. You are not tied to this for that, the other for that. You're not tied to fixed cause-effect chains. You have a flexible use. You can use anything to bring about whatever the outcome you choose. So, just rereading the sentence, you'll see how much is captured in it. The Supreme pours himself out of an eternal peace, poise and silence into an eternal activity, free and infinite, freely fixing for itself its self-determinations, using infinite quality to shape out of it a varied combination of qualities. So the thing is, when the Supreme pours himself out completely free, all these combinations of qualities freely he can draw out. And we have to go back to that peace, poise and silence and act out of it with the divine freedom from the bondage of qualities, but still using qualities, even the most opposite, largely and flexibly for the divine work in the world. So now we're seeing two levels. One is the supreme action, and the second is our role in it. And we are sharing that in a certain sense, but to fulfill that for the divine work. There is a divine work already taking place from the Supreme. We align ourselves now with that. To that extent, we are immersed in identification with Him, but we are a special focal point in which the same thing which is taking place on the cosmic scale is replicated on an individual scale, with the same poise, the same double station, and the same freedom and largeness of action. In one of the texts called Uma Sahasram, which is by Ganapati Muni, 1,000 names of the Divine Mother, he extols her powers and he says, if you so wish, out of a blade of grass you can draw out a roaring fire, and out of that roaring fire you can radiate cold. If you think about it, the character of the nature of the description is opposites. From small, wet, living object, a roaring fire, large, heat, completely impossible. Out of fire, cold, completely impossible, opposites. But if you observe the rationale of evolution, Sri Aurobindo points out, that's what evolution is doing. At each step, it creates the miracle, the very opposite of what was. Out of dead matter, living matter. Out of subconscious living matter, conscious living matter. From instinct to sentience, and from limited, narrow awareness to infinite awareness and freedom. And so, in this way, the nature of the divine journey is always drawing out, playing with its infinite possibilities, and from anything it can draw out anything. This idea is highlighted in this verse. In the implications it has for us, given any situation, when the divine force acts, it can draw out any outcome. Nothing is impossible for it. And so when we say, oh, I am so weak, how can this happen? How can I do this? Well, you cannot do it. But if you make yourself an instrument for the divine action working through you can make anything happen. Even using your weakness as its strength, it can work out something. The other level of implication, which is at a very material level, because we started with examples of science and its understanding of the physical universe. The other implication is because all objects are essentially bundles of gunas, supporting or concealing behind them the same one eternal. Therefore, out of any object you can draw out any guna. This is a very important insight. You can take any object and you can coax out of it any possibility of any guna, infinite potential. Now, in a very superficial level, you can say, fine, within this object is so much energy. Like it, with atomic energy, you can play with the atoms and release an enormous, humongous amount of energy. You go to subatomic particles, you can release even more, infinite energy. But not just energy, infinite qualities. And therefore you see the character of modern technology The cutting edge of technology is when out of one object you draw out qualities which are completely impossible for that object. You take a grain of sand, dead crystalline silicon, and out of that draw out intelligent behavior. You take sand which is non-conductive and make it semi-conductive, and therefore draw out from it possibilities. You take charcoal, and out of that you have a whole world of possibilities which are now, they call it the carbon, what is that? Nanotubes of carbons, and a whole lot of things which are at a nano level, but structures which are earlier were impossible to achieve. And the easiest way, this is a word which I'm missing still, where you have one single atomic layer of carbon which is bound in a certain structure. It's slipping my mind. The easiest way, the cheapest way to do that, you take a pencil, rub it on paper, take scotch tape, apply it to this, peel it off, and you have one layer of carbon in that particular grid, which is miraculous in its possibilities. I forget the term right now anyway. Nanostructures of carbon. And it's happened so simply, so easily. You could never have thought a child playing will do such things, and you'll say, what a waste. And he's actually discovered the most potent material today, which is being used for the most advanced technologies. But you see, the essence of the technology is drawing out possibilities which were not visible then. In Savitri, you'll find a few lines where Sri Aurobindo describes the achievements of science, when science boasts. And it says, to make water hard as stone and raiment out of milk. So the idea is, something which is soft you make hard, something which is ordinary, completely usual, you draw out of it something unusual. You see, in the skill of the ancients, when they played with these possibilities, the greatest creations were when you drew out of hard rigidity something soft and subtle. Some of the carvings which you find, the most beautiful sculptures, or the patterns which you see in stone, they look like lacework, as if the stone is so soft. And it's possible because the stone is hard. This is the apparent paradox. If the stone was soft, you cannot cut into it to make fine edges, fine lines. To be able to make fine lines and subtle arrangements, the stone has to be resistant enough that you can cut fine lines and retain them. If it is too soft, the moment you cut, they break. You cannot retain fine lines. You see here the sense of the paradox. Because it is hard, you can create out of it a soft and subtle creation. And it's the way it is in the whole universe. From the apparent limitation is the strength that is drawn out, and so on. That's why this reference to opposite qualities is very important, because the qualities are opposite because secretly inside they are aligned. Two things are going in the opposite direction. What does it mean? They're on the same line, right? There is a certain secret alignment, a secret resonance which makes it appear opposite when the form takes a different direction. But actually you have one, you have the other. There's a secret connection there. So this is the nature of the reality here. And so infinite qualities can be drawn out of anything. And as we master that, a situation will actually come where, let's say we take sand, a slab of sand. Out of that, by manipulating it in different ways, we will draw out whatever qualities we want. And the entire computer or tablet, pad, will be made of one single substance, modified in many ways. One part modified will then become the screen giving colors, another part modified will become the battery which holds energy, another part modified will be the electronics and the computing power. there will be one slab of substance in which modifications have created all these different qualities which now combine to make a working device. You see where I'm taking this discussion? Everything is there potentially within everything because all is the same, one eternal. And as the one eternal can modulate himself to put out any pattern of qualities, we also sharing in his power can take that substance and modulate it to dim or amplify various qualities and draw out anything without limitation. Sri Aurobindo comments in the Life Divine that the greatest power that humanity will have over matter will be the power to transmute one substance into another completely different. And that will be the full mastery. Anything can be made into anything and in any arrangement. So literally you will be materializing whatever you want out of anything else. So, using qualities, even the most opposite, largely and flexibly for the divine work in the world. Now this being our role in the larger work, there's a distinction. Only while the Lord acts out of the center of all things, we have to act by transmission of His will and power and self-knowledge through the individual center, the sole form of Him which we are. So we are the ray out of the parent sun, and so our fulfillment is in the ray. And so we are still in part of His glowing out of His light, but through this center, while He is operating through all the centers. And so when we interact with other centers, we meet Him in all those centers, while fulfilling Him through this particular center that we are, the sole form of Him which we are. The Lord is subject to nothing. The individual soul form is subject to its own highest self, because we are an emanation of that. He being everywhere and subject to nothing, we being in this soul center are subject to that aspect of Him that represents this soul center, subject to its own highest self. And the greater and more absolute is that subjection, the greater becomes its sense of absolute force and freedom. It's a beautiful paradoxical statement. You see, earlier we have seen in the ego consciousness that the more we were subject to something which is our authority, the less we had force, the less we had freedom. Because I'm subject to this authority which is other than I. But now when you're aligned with the divine, stationed in the self and working through this soul center, the more you're subject to that which is yourself, the more absolute is that subjection, the greater becomes its sense of absolute force and freedom, because that is the nature of the source with which you have aligned yourself. That is absolute freedom, absolute force. And the more you're aligning to it, you share in its absolute freedom and absolute force, and yet operating through this center. So the word subjection has a very different sense here. We have always looked at subjection in the sense of a limitation, because the thing we subjected ourselves to was limited. And we were perhaps even greater than that to which we subjected. But here we are subjecting ourselves to that which is ourselves, which is our own completeness, which is our source, which is free and infinite. Subjecting ourselves to its absolute force and freedom, we share in its absolute force and freedom. And there is a progressive degree of subjection to that. The more complete, the more absolute, the more we share in that. So even from the poise of a self-realized consciousness, our whole nature may not be fully under subjection of that. And so there is a process of putting it part by part under subjection to it, aligning it, and that would still not be transformation. A transformation would be when each of those parts now not only is subject to that, but is recast in that mold. That would be the transformation. So there's a first layer where we awaken into a freedom. From that poise of freedom, we now realign our relationship with our own personality, our own nature, gradually bringing it more and more in alignment with that which we are in our highest. And then subsequently comes the phase of transforming in the power and image of that. And that's why Sri Aurobindo makes this comment, which is often misunderstood. He says, my yoga starts where others end. While the traditional yogas stop with this idea, here I am now subject to the Lord, His instrument, one with Him in consciousness, finished, journey is over. He says now that's when the real journey begins, because you are going to participate consciously in the divine work in the world, which is not only in terms of action outside you, it is action within you, on your nature itself, which now has to be liberated and transformed in the image of the divine. So this, he is not going into detail at this point, but this is the implication of what we have just read, which is elaborated later in another section of this text. So we pause here. The next paragraph takes up the question of personal and impersonal God, which is and the sense of it in the European context as well as in the Indian context, and how he reconciles these, and even these two approaches which are distinct between the European and the Indian. It's a very interesting discussion, because we come now face to face with the forms of deities. We have so far dealt with the eternal, the absolute, the one who is all. But what do those forms of deity mean and represent? How do we relate to them, and so on? It's a fascinating discussion. You can take up any questions or comments. You see, we have looked at the text on many levels, and implications on many levels, both in our individual personality as well as in our own liberated consciousness, but also at the level of matter and our relationship with matter and the possibilities which that brings up in science, in technology. That too is part of the larger revolution.
When you said, yes, one can become individual with the Lord. So no one becomes individual with the Lord of all the universe. You explained, and this, of course, I understood, because when here we are individual, that when we become subject to the Lord, we are no more. But you said a word, I think I heard that you said, but we still have I. We still I. You said like this, no?
I said we can still share in his experience of the world. You cannot become individually the Lord, but you can experience, the discussion here is, of course, you can experience the silence, and then you can experience the power, the aspect of the manifestation as I, which is an aspect, a special aspect of him. But you can experience the sense of how the Lord experiences himself as the universe and in the universe. That one can glimpse, but it is as if the drop opening itself to experience the whole ocean. But then still, it relates, it does not lose itself in the ocean, it relates to its particular role in the ocean.
This sentence actually there is no exclusivity, so just because someone is attend to that, you cannot say I am your and so someone else cannot do that.
Yes. So if you have that experience, or even a partial experience in that direction of oneness with the all, You can never say that something is not I or another is not, because you experience all of it vividly as yourself. But you can take a position where you differentiate yourself from another. It's like this. We think of these experiences as a single whole monotone experience. The reality is these experiences are also, like the reality of the universe, multi-layered. There is this part of me that is completely outside space and time in an immense silence and wholeness. And then there's a part of me that from that poise turns and looks upon space-time and multiplicity of forms. And then there's a part of me that enters the space-time multiplicity of forms and sees it from inside the system. And there's a part of me that then centers itself inside this personality and form. And at that point I can see you and meet you as another who is yet that taking a similar poise inside this form. But at the same time, I am overwhelmed with the fullness of the one in which all these forms exist and out of which these forms have been created. And here I can modulate the experience. I can be overwhelmed by this oneness, or for the purpose of practical interaction with you, I can hold it back, but never lose it. And then I sit with you and chat as if we are two different people and we are going to work in a particular way.
Thinking of the condition of the world, where we are in right now, all the pollution and all the nuclear waste and all the whatever we are dealing with right now, all the plastic in the ocean. So, I mean, we have this consciousness, we can know this consciousness, we can basically change all that instantaneously.
Yes.
And it's like one person can do that.
As a miraculous intervention, you
Yes,
mean?
as a
Okay.
one person with that consciousness
Yes.
can do it. I mean, I believe this is, openly or not, I don't know.
Yes.
But I mean, it's just to imagine how would the reaction
Yes, it's a very,
of the other, of
Yes.
mankind who don't understand to this be suddenly, these problems of religion of these cats or whatever can be reversed or poisoned or
yes. So here's the interesting thing.
yeah.
We're taking an extreme situation today where there's a huge amount of plastic waste in the oceans, there are all these poisons thrown out into the life systems, destroying life and so on. And she said, even one person could intervene miraculously and set it right. And this is where the question comes. Not only you could intervene miraculously, using a certain spiritual power to transmute those elements, materials, you could also intervene non-spiritually, using a technological form of that power. Finally, it's the same power operative through different processes of nature rather than directly by consciousness, right? Operating at a new level, a lower level in nature. One person could build a machine which is able to pick all these materials and transmute them and put them back in a safe way into nature. Or build 1 million such machines, whatever. They're all equivalent. I'm saying the miraculous intervention is equivalent to somebody developing a technology to intervene. And so now the question I'm putting in context, putting all these in equivalence, what is the context in which this will take place technologically? When people wake up and choose to put energies to solve this problem. And yes, well, not that they don't want, they don't care, or they're not aware, most people. But now I'm putting this larger picture. The miraculous intervention equally needs that context, if it is not to break the evolutionary process. Now, the miraculous interventions have taken place when humanity was not conscious enough, when we did stupid things without realizing them, and there have been divine interventions even to contain and limit the damage, sometimes using material instruments also, and we didn't know it, because, well, that was our level of development then. But as we come into knowledge, if the miraculous intervention continued, then we would simply assume, this is how nature works, and continue to abuse our knowledge and freedom, That's where the divine withdraws. As we come into our, let's say, maturity or partial maturity, the divine withdraws and now allows us to face the consequence of our errors, so that we may now take responsibility and grow to the next level of maturity. So here's this is paradoxical. The miraculous intervention is given as long as we are immature. It's withdrawn when we grow into maturity. So in fact, it has happened in history, and particularly in the last several hundred years or even in the last few thousand years, that many things which were being given actively to support human development were withdrawn. Even divine beings who had taken birth, let's say in the last century, you see all over the world a series of great vibhutis, great avataric personalities at the same time. And around 1950, suddenly all of them withdraw. A few remain, and then suddenly there's like a vacuum. And all the people you see now, they're almost like midgets compared to those gigantic personalities. And you wonder why. Precisely because those beings came to give the necessary push to wake up enough and then leave you now to, okay, now take responsibility and change yourself. That part, if it did not allow, we would remain in that bad habit. As happens with little children, every time he leaves his toys scattered, the mother comes and rearranges them. All the way into adulthood, he has now the habit of leaving all his things scattered and expecting someone to come and rearrange them. So there has to be a transition where you are led. And yet, the miraculous intervention will be held back where necessary. Where necessary, it is still done. We may not know always. I've referred earlier to Mother's description of how one morning she woke up and there was this horrible smell in the whole atmosphere. And when she looked at it, she found there was the Chinese had exploded a nuclear bomb close to the Indian border. And on the subtle worlds, it had spread this huge stench. Now, a stench in the subtle world has its physical ramifications, not only at the level of the psychology of people, but in its physical outcome in the formation of microbes and viruses. And so she said she spent 2 hours working intensely to gather all that and isolating that thing which had been released and limiting the damage. And the same thing has been happening every time that we've been exploding nuclear weapons. On those levels, there has been a damage control, but also on the physical level. They have, for example, observed flying saucers coming. Flying saucers, extraterrestrial beings coming there just after nuclear explosions, doing something. And what we are told by people who have had those contacts, that they were limiting and absorbing the radiation which was being released. And I remember one of the very interesting interactions documented in Brazil by somebody, the name of the book, do you know? Dino Kraspedon is the author. It's a pen name he took. Where he discusses, and I'm referring to this particularly because this was in 1954. The knowledge he received from those beings, looking very human-like, describing so many things which were later confirmed by science 20, 30 years later, describing even their science, which is quite extraordinary and perfectly in alignment with the Vedic approach. They explained to him that your understanding of nuclear power is still very infantile. You know only the grossest form of the radiation, which what they call alpha particles, beta particles, and so on. But there are finer radiations which go right through all your reactor walls, and they affect life at a genetic level, at a deep level. And it is going right through all your walls. So you can have a nuclear power station here and cover it with all the steel and concrete you want, thinking you've blocked the most coarse form of radiation, but the subtlest form is still going right out there. And it is weakening matter from inside and weakening the life structures from inside. Now, this statement, of course, later has been confirmed by science's own experiments. But at that time, to say that, it's almost like an adult telling a child, look, you've just discovered this power. You're playing still with the most crude levels of your understanding of it. Be careful. Here are the things you should watch out for. So even agents of this kind, as if our own elder brothers are used through such transmissions of knowledge to warn. And of course, direct spiritual interventions are taking place at all times. But this is one of those most precarious transitions we're going through on Earth today. It's happened on other planets equally, where we have come into rational self-awareness, discovered as a process powers of nature, going to those fundamental powers which can destroy everything. And at that point you have this fine balance. You're still struggling with an ego-based consciousness, with powers which are enough to destroy, which can destroy in one push of a button the whole civilization. All the effort of the last 1 billion years of evolution could be wiped out. And yet you have to somehow come through, overcome your ego enough that you won't be doing such stupid things, for which you have to suffer the consequences of a few stupidities, but not too great. You see how fine the passage is. And it all happens within 1 or 2 generations. You can't even wait longer. And so it's one of the most precarious transition points. It's almost like this very narrow isthmus you cross, and then once you've made it across, again all the possibilities reopen on a new level of consciousness. That's why the avataric intervention is so critical at that point. And there's no other way. It's been done, and many times it has happened that it has failed. Perhaps even on Earth we have had so many civilizations and massive destructions of which we have records, as in Atlantis and otherwise. But this time, the supramental manifestation gives us the assurance. And Mother said, no more third world wars. There will be local battles, there will be tendencies, but the supramental force will ensure that we will come through it. And that's why it was so critical to bring down that power.
In the past, did the miracles really happen, or we didn't understand the phenomena at that time? Like this idea of miracles happening earlier and will not happen because we have gained consciousness.
No, they can still happen.
This premise.
No, there is no. The miraculous interventions by the divine consciousness are based on the freedom of the divine and the wisdom of the divine. When it sees necessary, it will intervene even now. But the balance of intervention is kept on the edge to allow us to grow also through our own stupidities. And that's why certain things the intervention is limited. But the nature of miraculous intervention, or what we call miracle, Sri Aurobindo defines a miracle as the use of a higher principle on a lower level of consciousness. So it's always a science, seen from another way, from a higher level of consciousness, it's a science. So in the past, what you may have called miracles, you say, maybe we didn't understand. Yes, but that's why it's a miracle, because we don't understand. Even an occult... Yeah, but remember, when we say just natural forces, that is the error we make. When we say just natural forces, we dismiss them as purely mechanical and unintentional. The truth behind that is they are conscious powers of the divine. Because they are following certain rhythms over a long period of time, we say, but that is how it is in nature's force. But where did the force come from? Why did it take that pattern? Why does it sustain that pattern? There's a conscious will behind. So there's no such thing as just natural forces. All are powers of the divine. Only we do not see the will or the intention behind those forces. And so we say, this is a mechanical, natural appearance. Right? But within that so-called mechanical appearance, there can still be the full freedom of the divine at any time popping up to modify where necessary. When it is invisible, occult, meaning hidden, then we say miracle. When it acts through a visible means, then we say so and so intervened, or so and so natural process intervened. But still it's the same thing finally. So in the larger picture, everything is an operation and working of the divine. So it's a fascinating subject, and many interesting facets and deeper facets of experience, which we will continue next time in the personal and impersonal divine. and all the deities and gods and forms in which they play out. Oh.